faithfully delivering value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally talking books. Today, I'll be interpreting the book Chernobyl, A History of Tragedy, at 1:23 a.m. on April 26, 1986. A mushroom cloud soared over 1,000 meters high above the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the Soviet Union, with flames like pillars. With a massive explosion sound, black smoke blotted out the sky. This was the worst accident since humanity entered the nuclear age. It released nuclear radiation equivalent to 500 times that of the Hiroshima atomic bomb explosion. After the accident, 120,000 people within a 30-kilometer radius were evacuated. The nearby town of Pripyat became a ghost town. The area around the plant won't be habitable for at least 20,000 years. Former Soviet leader Gorbachev even suggested that Chernobyl might be the true cause of the Soviet Union's collapse. In 2014, KGB documents on the accident were released. Author Serhiy Plokhy, an American historian, used these and many eyewitness interviews to cover over 400 people, from leaders to civilians, fully recounting Chernobyl's story and its human disaster. Plokhy is a professor of Ukrainian history at Harvard and a leading scholar on Eastern Europe. His books include The Collapse of Great Powers, The Backstage of the Soviet Collapse, Yalta, 8 Days That Changed the World, all internationally acclaimed. Published in 2018, the book won awards like the Nonfiction Writing Benchmark, Bailey Gifford Prize, Russian Theme Benchmark, and Pushkin Book Prize. The book was praised by The Economist, Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, sold in 10 countries, and endorsed by Nobel laureate S.A. Alexeyevich. The Economist magazine's review: this book is the most authoritative historical account of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. Now, I'll break it down into 3 parts to uncover the truth of Chernobyl for you. First, how the Chernobyl incident occurred. Second, how the Soviet government responded after the accident. Third, what impacts did Chernobyl cause? First, let's talk about how the Chernobyl incident happened. Before that, we need to understand the background of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant's construction. Chernobyl is a small town in northern Ukraine, about 130 kilometers from Kyiv, a major Ukrainian city. In 1954, the world's first nuclear power plant was built in the Soviet Union. At that time, during the US-Soviet Cold War, nuclear energy was seen as a revolution that could change human industry. Major powers like the US and Soviet Union quickly started a nuclear race. Under this backdrop, nuclear power plants sprang up all over the Soviet Union. In the 1960s, Ukraine, lacking power facilities, wanted to catch up with the national nuclear trend and chose Chernobyl. A new nuclear power plant was built in a village under Chernobyl's jurisdiction and named the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. So this location was chosen because it's sparsely populated, far from cities, and low risk. Plus, Chernobyl is near a river and a train station, making it easy to transport people and materials and solving water supply issues for the plant. In 1977, the first nuclear reactor was completed and put into use. By the 1980s, Chernobyl had 4 reactor units up and running, becoming the world's 3rd largest nuclear plant. With units 5 and 6 under construction, it was expected to finish by 1990. The plant's construction boosted prosperity in small towns near Chernobyl. Pripyat is 3.5 kilometers north of the plant. Originally, the city plan aimed for 18,000 residents by 1980. Actually, by 1986, nearly 50,000 people lived there, mostly construction workers and operators from the plant, since the nuclear industry was prioritized. During a time of nationwide shortages, this city had plenty of consumer goods and farm products. Cheese and sausage, scarce elsewhere, were easy to find in Pripyat. However, this nuclear-based life had hidden dangers from the start, because Chernobyl's 4 reactors were graphite reactors. while Western nations usually chose pressurized water reactors, using water as coolant and moderator. Chernobyl's graphite reactors used bomb-making tech. They still used water as coolant, but the core's moderator was graphite. Compared to that, pressurized water reactors are safer.
But they're more expensive and have higher technical requirements, while graphite reactors are cheaper.
Plus, their electricity output is twice that of pressurized water reactors, a real bang for your buck. Soviet graphite reactors were spread across its European territories. By 1982, half of the electricity from Soviet nuclear plants came from graphite reactors. But Chernobyl's graphite reactors had design flaws that could cause power surges or even meltdowns. Back in 1975, at the Leningrad nuclear plant, this flaw caused a near-total reactor meltdown, yet the cause was never made public. Even industry insiders didn't know what happened in Leningrad.
Officials kept insisting graphite reactors were safe as a Russian samovar, reliable enough for Red Square.
To prove Chernobyl's safety, locals could even raise fish in the plant's cooling ponds. So confident were they that Chernobyl skipped the containment structure to cut costs further. A containment structure is a concrete dome preventing radiation leaks during accidents. In 1985, Gorbachev became the Soviet Communist Party's general secretary. The Soviet economy was then stagnant, with deep-rooted problems. Gorbachev launched radical reforms and set ambitious goals to fix this. He aimed to double the GDP before the year 2000. This depended on tech revolutions and energy restructuring, especially nuclear power. For Chernobyl, it meant the 4 existing reactors had to overachieve power quotas. Reactors 5 and 6 under construction also needed rushed completion. Energy Minister Mayoretz even slashed reactor maintenance time to boost output. Moreover, Chernobyl had safety issues during both construction and operation. But nobody paid proper attention to these red flags. Plant operators prioritized power generation. Maintenance could wait. All right, that's the background. Chernobyl's graphite reactors were flawed from the start. Due to its nuclear energy demands, the Soviet Union didn't address this issue. By April 1986, Chernobyl's Reactor 4 needed shutdown for routine maintenance. And during maintenance, a chain of bad decisions and violations turned design flaws into reality, causing disaster. There were 3 major errors. First, postponing the maintenance test. One test required running the reactor at low power before shutdown. Early April 25th, Reactor 4 began shutdown, cutting power to half. At 2 p.m., grid operators called. A southern Ukrainian plant had shut down, so Chernobyl must keep generating power. They'd resume the test that night when demand dropped, forcing the reactor into dangerous, low-power operation for hours. But low-power operation is unsafe. Reactions become uncontrollable. At 10 p.m. on the 25th, clearance finally came for the test and shutdown. Reactors are like airplanes. Startup and shutdown are the riskiest phases, but the reactor schedule was already derailed. The shift crew lacked experience. 33-year-old Akimov and 25-year-old Toptanov, under Dyatlov's shouting, they rushed procedures. Then crisis alarms flashed. Coolant water nearly exhausted after low-power operation.
Power plunged to 30 megawatts, normal 3,000 megawatts. Operator stabilized it but kept it dangerously low.
The safest option was orderly shutdown and restart later. But that took time, meaning the day's test couldn't be completed. So Dyatov pushed ahead at 200 megawatts, back to unsafe low power. That was mistake number 2. However, the reactor's power couldn't be maintained and kept dropping. To boost power, the operators made a third mistake. They broke rules by pulling out almost all control rods, leaving just 9. Let me explain. Reactor 4 had 211 control rods. Insert them to reduce power. Pull out to increase. During operation, at least 30 rods should remain in the core. Never below 15, or the reactor risks going out of control.
They crossed that red line. With most rods pulled, the reactor went wild. Power skyrocketed. Operators screamed.
Finally, they pressed the AZ-5 emergency shutdown button.
This should have dropped all rods instantly to stop the reactor. But
This very action doomed them completely. First, the reactor had a positive void coefficient. Simply put, prolonged low-power operation and coolant shortage created steam, weakening cooling and causing power or temperature surges. This was another design flaw in Chernobyl's graphite reactors.
Another design flaw.
Control rods had boron carbide bodies to slow reactions, but their tips were graphite, which first boosts power when inserted. Only when boron carbide enters does slowing begin.
Like faulty brakes. Stepping down initially accelerates the car. You must keep pressing to stop.
This graphite flaw nearly destroyed Leningrad's reactor in 1975. They shut it down just in time, but Chernobyl wasn't so lucky. After pressing AZ5, rods jammed. High temperatures caused partial core explosions.
They only inserted 1/3 before jamming.
So the brake never fully engaged. Reactions ran wild. Power rocketed from 200 megawatts to 30,000 megawatts, 10 times normal.
4 seconds after pressing AZ5, people in the control room heard explosions. First a low moan like human groaning, then a massive shockwave.
With a tremendous blast, it was like a volcanic eruption. The 200-ton concrete dispersion. The 200-ton concrete lid covering the core was blown off. Graphite blocks and nuclear fuel fragments sprayed highly radioactive material across every corner of the plant. Smoke soared over 1,000 meters high. Flames shot skyward. Sparks rained down, igniting 30-plus fires throughout the plant. This was around 1:23 a.m. on April 26, 1986. The control room crew stood frozen. They vaguely knew they'd broken rules, but pressing AZ5 should have been fail-safe. No textbook they'd ever read mentioned reactors could explode. Outside, by the cooling ponds, fishermen were the first witnesses. On that mild April night, they stared dumbfounded, unaware of what it meant. In Nobel winner Alexievich Voices from Chernobyl, a Pripyat resident recalled the reactor's fire glowing with surreal beauty that night, stunning even kilometers away. Pripyat residents woke and rushed to balconies, marveling at the sight. Breathing, chatting, admiring. Only those who lived it knew death's color could be so beautiful.
Now for part 2. How the Soviets handled the aftermath.
In the first 24 hours, Soviet response was marked by confusion and denial.
5 minutes post-explosion, the 2nd Special Military Fire Brigade arrived first. No radiation warnings, and the heat was unbearable.
Firefighters stripped uniforms and helmets, walking roads littered with radioactive graphite. The reactor loomed 72 meters tall, like a 17-story building.
They rushed into the fire. Within half an hour, some collapsed.
Nausea, vomiting, splitting headaches. Ambulances hauled them away immediately.
That night, 132 firefighters and plant staff went to emergency rooms, later transferred to Moscow hospitals.
40 minutes after the explosion, plant director Brukhanov finally woke to a ringing phone. Ryukanov, 50 years old, he was chief engineer at a coal plant in eastern Ukraine, but nuclear experts were scarce. Over a decade ago, he was urgently tasked with building Chernobyl. Moscow assured him, "Don't worry if you don't know nuclear. Power plants work similarly." When Brukhanov arrived and saw Reactor 4's roof blown off, he thought, "This will be my prison." All his past honors vanished in that moment. He set up a command center in Chernobyl's underground bunker, but nobody understood what was happening.
Meanwhile, Reactor 4's control room hissed with steam and crackling electrical shorts like gunfire.
Deputy Chief Engineer Dyatlov realized fission was ongoing. He sent 2 trainees to manually push control rods deeper. They returned soon. Elevators crushed, stairs collapsed. Mission impossible. Radiation from that doomed trip would kill them shortly after. Someone mumbled in the control room. This is like Hiroshima. Wolf replied,
I never imagined this could happen, even in nightmares.
By 4 a.m., nausea forced him out. The night shift operators remained, waiting for relief. Akimov and Toptunov's skin turned brown from radiation. Swollen faces and hands made speech near impossible, yet they focused only on confusion and guilt. Around 2.5 hours post-explosion, radiation detectors maxed out. Later estimation, radiation near Reactor 4 hit 10,000 roentgen per hour. 3 minutes exposure meant certain death. At dawn, 2 engineers sent by Brukhanov scouted. One climbed Reactor 4's roof, saw total destruction and fire. That glimpse later killed him.
By nearly 7 a.m., firefighters finally extinguished the blaze.
Brukhanov, sensing catastrophe, privately suggested evacuating citizens, but superiors refused, fearing panic. The KGB cut intercity phone lines to prevent leaks, and insiders were ordered to stay silent. After dawn on the 26th, children played in sand and rode bikes outdoors, while 7 couples held open-air weddings. A man sunbathed on his apartment roof that morning. Soon his skin reeked of burnt flesh.
That night, he was rushed to hospital by ambulance after nonstop vomiting.
5 a.m. on the 26th, 3 hours post-explosion. Soviet leader Gorbachev learned of the blast but was told the reactor remained intact. The government formed a state committee to investigate and manage the crisis. Around 9 a.m. on the 26th, the first committee members raced to Chernobyl. They discovered the reactor was far more damaged than reported. 10 kilometers away, the plant glowed crimson under a radioactive haze. Energy Minister Mayoretz, in office less than a year, arrived at the scene. He appeared impeccably dressed, hair neatly combed as always. When evacuation was proposed, he objected. "What if you're wrong? The danger is clearly exaggerated." The Soviets hadn't evacuated civilians for any reason since 2002, agreeing that would likely end his ministerial career.
2 Moscow experts confirmed the reactor's destruction via helicopter. The minister asked,
"What now?" "Heaven knows," replied an expert.
"But the graphite's still burning. We must extinguish it first."
At 8 p.m., Deputy Premier Sherbina arrived on site. As committee head, he mobilized military helicopters and chemical teams. An hour later, 3 violent explosions rocked the reactor, signaling potential larger blasts.
Another major explosion could release radiation clouds, rendering most of Europe uninhabitable.
This second explosion wave shattered officials' remaining denial. Around dawn on April 27th, 24 hours post-disaster, officials finally ordered Pripyat's evacuation with Premier Ryzhkov's approval. At 1 p.m., city broadcasts ordered evacuation. Take essentials and board buses within an hour. Most residents weren't surprised. They sighed with relief. Though landlines were cut, news spread through whispers. People thought it temporary, acting as casually as heading to a group camping trip. By 4:30 p.m., the city emptied. Within a day, a 10-kilometer radius became the permanent exclusion zone, Pripyat abandoned forever.
Meanwhile, reactor entombment accelerated.
Air Force helicopters dropped sandbags mixed with clay, boron, and lead. Sand to smother flames, the rest to cool and prevent chain reactions. Above Reactor 4, pilots saw even crows couldn't spread wings. Radiation was that intense. Standard protocol: 1 4-minute material drop, then immediate hospitalization. Yet most flew nonstop for 8 days, dumping approximately 5,000 tons of material into the reactor. But did the sandbags actually work? Experts disagreed. By early May, they feared reactor water might worsen explosions. 3 engineers drained 20,000 tons of highly radioactive water. Firefighters pumped it away. Those engineers died soon after. On May 5th, radiation finally fell. To this day, nobody knows why or which measure worked. In the disaster's first 2 weeks, Soviet response was chaotic. By May, the government mobilized nationwide resources for cleanup. 600,000 people, half military, were conscripted. They decontaminated villages, injected concrete under the reactor to block radiation seepage. From June to November 1986, Soviets built a 400,000-ton concrete structure over the core, later called the sarcophagus, finally containing radiation. Wendy West Park, West Poke. Despite the severity, the Soviet government initially tried to contain Chernobyl's information, keeping the disaster localized. This was policy long before the accident. Soviet media stayed silent, but radiation clouds drifted over Europe, drawing global attention.
On April 28th, a Swedish nuclear plant 1,200 kilometers from Chernobyl detected radiation spikes.
Sweden traced it to the USSR and contacted Moscow but got no response.
Sweden's environment minister declared, "Hiding radioactive leaks violates international norms."
Day 3 of the disaster. On day 3, Soviet media admitted a damaged reactor. omitting radiation spikes and evacuations. On May Day, Kyiv held a 2,000-person parade near Chernobyl to project normalcy.
Radiation hit 2,500 microsieverts per hour, 100 times normal. Yet Ukrainian and Soviet leaders attended, along with children.
No protective gear was worn to downplay dangers. A Ukrainian party secretary's wife recalled Gorbachev threatening expulsion if the parade was canceled. Soviet atomic industry chiefs told officials, "Don't panic, I'll shut down your reactor myself if needed." A pregnant parade attendee lost her baby 2 months later. She mailed curses to every leader on the podium.
Go to hell, all of you!
20 years later, Gorbachev claimed the parade aimed to prevent panic, but people weren't fools.
By early May, Kyiv stations overflowed with desperate crowds. Sold-out tickets sparked screaming matches.
On May 5th, 7 nations, US, Japan, France, etc., demanded full Soviet disclosure. Soviet leaders were stunned by persistent global scrutiny. On May 14th, 18 days after the accident, Gorbachev finally gave a televised speech admitting that 299 people had radiation sickness. On July 3rd, 2.5 months after the accident, Soviet authorities held a Politburo meeting to investigate the cause, summarize lessons, and assign responsibility. Ultimately, the accident report stated that it was caused by severe violations of technical procedures by personnel and serious design flaws in the reactor. But the fundamental cause was human error by the staff. Former plant director Bryukhanov, former chief engineer Fomin, and his deputy Dyatlov were sentenced to 10 years in prison, while 3 other operators received sentences ranging from 2 to 5 years. And men in court, Dyatlov insisted the cause was design flaws in the graphite reactor, but no one listened. In reality, many insiders and high-level officials knew Dyatlov was right, but admitting this was too costly. Besides Chernobyl's Reactor 4, the USSR had 12 other operational graphite reactors, providing half its nuclear power. Shutting them all down would cause immense economic losses, leaving many cities without power. Switching to new energy was too expensive for the depleted Soviet treasury. Thus, blaming the operators and plant leaders as scapegoats for operational errors was the most respectable solution. So, in late August, the IAEA held a meeting in Vienna where Soviet scientist Legasov reported on the nuclear accident. Legasov was the chief scientific advisor to the government committee handling the accident and the real-life inspiration for the Chernobyl TV series protagonist. At the time, the international community was deeply disappointed by Soviet secrecy and demanded they shut down all graphite reactors and compensate affected nations. To reverse this impression, with Premier Ryzhkov's approval, Legasov extended his planned 30-minute report to over 4 hours at the Vienna meeting. He detailed the reactor's design and the accident's full story, astonishing the 1,000 scientists and journalists from 62 countries who gave him a standing ovation. People expressed encouragement for the Soviet willingness to share experiences and cooperate internationally. And in the report, Legasov followed the Soviet authorities' line, blaming the accident on the operator's mistakes. Legasov was a loyal believer in the Soviet system and a man of great sacrifice. He rushed to Chernobyl on the very night of the accident as an advisor to assist in the aftermath. This case, colleagues on site described him as responsible, always the first to charge forward. After the Vienna conference, many thought Legasov would receive the Soviet Union's highest honor for his Chernobyl contributions. But it didn't happen. Some officials felt he leaked too much state secrets, which devastated Legasov and made him feel betrayed by the higher-ups. After returning from Vienna, he remained depressed and disheartened, and due to radiation, he developed cancer and depression. On April 27, 1988, the day after Chernobyl's 2nd anniversary, Legasov committed suicide. That concludes Part 2. After the Chernobyl nuclear accident, the Soviet Union mobilized 600,000 people for cleanup and, under international pressure,
disclosed detailed information about the accident. And
However, due to reliance on nuclear energy, the accident's responsibility was blamed on the operator's mistakes.
After Reactor 4 exploded, construction on reactors 5 and 6 halted, but due to energy shortages, the other 3 reactors kept operating, separated by a 200-meter concrete wall from Unit 4. It wasn't until 2000 that the Chernobyl plant completely ceased power generation. This accident had profound impacts on the environment and human lives.
The book's author believes it also set the stage for the Soviet Union's collapse.
Now for part 3, we'll discuss the aftermath of Chernobyl.
First, the environment. Currently, nearly 38,000 square kilometers in Ukraine are contaminated, accounting for 5% of its territory. In Belarus, over 40,000 square kilometers are polluted, about 23% of its land area. About 1/3 of the country's arable land was also abandoned. The Soviet government designated a 30-kilometer radius around the exploded reactor as an exclusion zone, evacuating all residents, fencing it with barbed wire, and setting up checkpoints. Inside the zone, only rotating monitoring staff and workers from Chernobyl's other 3 operating reactors remain. Scientists estimate that the area near Chernobyl won't be habitable for humans for 20,000 years. Near Pripyat, a forest turned red from high radiation, dubbed the Red Forest, with 10 square kilometers of pines affected. A beekeeper from a nearby village noticed his bees flew away that night on April 26, only returning gradually 6 years later. The Soviets paid a heavy price in lives for this nuclear disaster. Nuclear radiation can cause nausea and radiation burns. That's when skin darkens. If exposed to over 600 Roentgen, it gradually damages bone marrow stem cells, gut cells, and even wrecks the cardiovascular and nervous systems, leading to death. 2 operators from Reactor 4's control room died half a month after the accident. Also among the deceased were 6 firefighters, who were among the first to arrive. Within 4 months after the accident, 28 people died from radiation exposure. Cleanup workers were exposed to radiation levels 120 times the safe dose. Many of them went to the front lines for bonuses, honor, or out of a spirit of sacrifice. In the 20 years after the accident, 20,000 of these people died, and 200,000 were disabled, with death and disability rates much higher than the general public. Also, none is fired. Ludmila, the wife of a firefighter, witnessed her husband's death in full. Her account was recorded in the book Voices from Chernobyl. Her husband was among the first firefighters to rush to the scene. He was later sent to a hospital in Moscow. In the hospital, Ludmila hid her pregnancy and tirelessly cared for her husband and his comrades. Her husband's condition changed daily. Ulcers on his face grew larger. His body color shifted from blue-black to purple-red, then gray-brown, and he had bowel movements 20 to 30 times a day, passing blood and mucus. Later, their stomachs necrotized, and they couldn't eat. 14 days after the accident, all 6 firefighters died. Doctors repeatedly warned Ludmila not to approach, kiss, or touch her husband, because that wasn't her loved one. It was a highly contaminated, radioactive source. Sure enough, months later, Ludmila gave birth to a child with cirrhosis and congenital heart disease. The baby died just 4 hours after birth. After the child's death, Ludmila had a stroke. She later moved to Kyiv, where she lived on a street called Chernobyl Street. Most people here were Chernobyl workers, all seriously ill and disabled, with frequent deaths. But how many actually died from radiation in this disaster? It's impossible to calculate. Oh, well, radiation isn't obvious like burns. It damages the body internally, yet proving it's the real culprit is hard. Deaths and disabilities get blamed on organ failure or other illnesses. Neither Soviet authorities nor the international community agree on Chernobyl's death toll. UN and Greenpeace estimates put deaths between 4,000 to 90,000 people. Survivors continue enduring immense suffering.
After the disaster, Chernobyl survivors often gave birth to disabled children.
In Voices from Chernobyl, local midwives reported the most common question was, is the baby whole? One plant driver's wife delivered a stillborn missing 2 fingers. But seeking justice is tough. Proving stillbirths linked to radiation is difficult. The government even accused parents of faking for subsidies. Yet the data doesn't lie. In Ukraine, childhood cancer cases surged 90% within 5 years of the disaster. Radiation made local women age rapidly. 40-year-olds had skin like 60-year-olds. So girls rushed to marry. Their youth was tragically short. Politically, Chernobyl became the straw that broke the Soviet Union's back. After the explosion, Ukraine saw 2 massive protests, with tens of thousands participating. By 1989, nationwide movements linked nuclear safety with national liberation, making contamination a public issue. Chernobyl became a symbol of the Soviet system. Soon after, the USSR collapsed. In August 1991, Ukraine declared independence, but inherited its economic decline. The existing Soviet downturn and Chernobyl cleanup overwhelmed it further. By the mid-90s, Ukraine spent 5% of its annual budget on Chernobyl, with 65% of social welfare aiding 3.3 million recognized victims. Russia, Ukraine, Belarus. These post-Soviet nations each bore hundreds of billions in losses from Chernobyl.
Western governments and financial institutions gave Ukraine $2.03 in loans and aid, but demanded Chernobyl's closure by 2000.
Ukraine did temporarily shut it down, but due to economic crisis in the late 90s, they restarted Chernobyl anyway.
The remaining reactors boosted GDP, terrifying Western nations into offering another $715 million loan. When Chernobyl finally closed permanently, Western scholars called Ukraine's tactic environmental blackmail or nuclear extortion. Additionally, the European Bank funded a 30,000-ton sliding steel arch over the sarcophagus for reinforcement. This structure lasts a century, completed in 2017 at over €3 billion cost. Nobody imagined Chernobyl would operate greater than 10 years post-explosion, or take greater than 30 years to build a new shelter. Though still uninhabitable for humans, wildlife has quietly returned. Experts note more wolves in the exclusion zone than nearby reserves, but with higher rates of albinism and cataracts. Today, Chernobyl is a time capsule preserving pre-Soviet collapse relics, even becoming an international tourism site. For under €500, you can visit from Brussels, Berlin, or Amsterdam. In the book's opening, the author joins tourists with a young Ukrainian guide. Near Reactor 4, radiation alarms blared. The guide casually switched them off. In the preface, the author reflects, blaming Soviet bureaucracy and reactor flaws is easy. That implies these problems are confined to the past. Chernobyl stemmed from authorities wanting national strength, economic growth, and solutions to energy or population crises. Ecological concerns got mere lip service. Now, facing worsening population, economic, and ecological crises, nuclear reliance only grows. As of 2019, there were 667 nuclear power plants worldwide, with 16 countries building 66 new reactors. If we don't learn from this, Chernobyl-style disasters could easily happen again. Well, that concludes this tragic history. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.